Okay, so here we have the positive edge triggered JK flip-flop. So if you look at the clock input here, this is the JK flip-flop is originally a negative edge triggered. So you have to input this not gate for the clock input to make it into a positive edge triggered. And then we input another not gate here for the scope to read it as a regular clock input. So if we go ahead and run this, and then open the input scopes and open this one. So looking at the inputs J and K, comparing to the positive edges of the clock. So here we got the first positive edge, and we got a 0 and a 0 for J and K. So the output will remain in the current state it stays in. Then on the next positive edge of the clock, the input of J and K opposites. You got a 1 here and the 0 for K. So these will be, so as the function is like an XOR function, the output Q will go up to 1. Then on the next positive edge of the clock, you have a 1 and a 1. So then the output will go back down to 0. Then on the next positive edge of the clock, as you also have a 0 and a 0 here, you will remain in the current state you have. Then looking at the next positive edge, the clock, you got a 1 for J and a 0 for K, so you will go from 0 to 1 for the output. And then looking at the next positive output of the next positive edge of the clock, you have a 1 for J, and it is right before the K goes up to 1, so it's at 0. So you will remain in your current state at 1 for Q. And then on the next positive edge of the clock, you have a 0 and a 0, so you will then remain at your current state for the rest of the circuit. As you go up for the final transition, you have a 0 and a 1, so it will go back, you'll stay at 1 again. Looking at Q prime, you have the opposite of Q here. So for the positive edge of the clock, when these are both 0, you will stay at 1 now, and then as this one changes, as the clock changes from 0 to 1, you will have a 1 for J and a 0 for Q, so this will go from 1 to 0 for Q prime. And then again, on the next positive edge of the clock, you have a 1 and a 1, so this will then drop to 0 again, as it is an XOR function. And then looking at the next positive triggered edge, you have here, you have both a 0 and 0, so it will remain in its current state. And then the next positive edge, you have a 1 and a 0, so it will drop down to 0, and then it will remain at 0 for the rest. 0 for the rest of the clock transitions, as Q remains at 1 for the rest of the clock transitions.